The hooded figure held a strange glowing vessel. The scene took place in the kingdom of Frenes, a land ruled by magicians, a kingdom embroiled in a long war for the throne. In the throne room, the young prince gave a grim order. His loyal followers were pleased with this decree, seeing him as the future king. He demanded the complete destruction of his rival's house. However, one of his guards hesitated. A cold alarm came over him too late. A mysterious figure appeared over his fallen body. The white-haired man calmly addressed the young heir, who froze in silence, realizing the collapse of his plan. One of the prince's assassins stepped forward, preparing to eliminate the uninvited guest. He lunged forward in a blur of light. The attacker's scarlet eyes tracked the attack. The assassin sneered, considering him one of those deprived of magic, confident that a simple ambush would be useless. But his blade was stopped by a strong grip, and in the next moment, he was overtaken by an irresistible force. The prince's champion was driven into the floor and defeated. The young heir watched in complete disbelief and fear. The pattern showed the lethality of a precise non-magical blow, and the attacker reminded him that magic cannot override human frailty, a lesson the prince learned too late. The main character stood completely unperturbed. The old court magician was preparing to intervene. He gathered lightning in his staff, uttered a spell, and unleashed a magic called Jawbreaker. But his spell was interrupted by a hand covering his face. A quick blow dislocated his jaw, completely depriving him of the ability to speak. The attacker noted that the mage was now unable to cast spells. The old man watched with silent fury, believing that he did not need words for his next action. The attacker's scarlet eyes narrowed in anticipation as the mage's staff flew forward under magical force, but it was all in vain. The warning was ignored. The prince fell in horror, realizing that his last hope was lost. The main character wondered why he was so surprised. The desperate heir drew his sword, accusing the attacker of being a murderer hired by his rival Heinz. The attacker confirmed that he was a murderer, but not a hired one. The prince looked on in confusion. Then he began to laugh hysterically, mocking the very idea that members of the royal family could have friends. In a flash of memory, the assailant remembered his people, the Gald, who were considered less than human. The prince tried to bargain, offering to double or triple the payment. But his words were cut short by a decisive movement. And at the moment when the prince fell, the attacker made it clear they were not cattle. After the incident, the death of the second prince was officially explained as illness, and a state funeral was held. When the long and bloody palace intrigue finally came to an end, a new figure sat in silence. A young man with blonde hair read by candlelight. The perpetrator emerged from the shadows, making his presence known. He looked up and called him Heinz. He believed that after his brother's death, he was sure to become the next king. He was interested in his feelings about achieving his goal, but he clarified that it was from this moment that their real dream began. He swore that once he ascended the throne, he would put an end to discrimination against the magicless Galda. The main character smiled gently, believing that she could do it. They held hands under the moonlight, united by a common purpose. He asked if he would come to his coronation, but he reminded him that Galda were not allowed there. He promised that this would not be the case when he became king. He accepted the idea, but advised him not to cause trouble so soon after coming to power. He agreed, expressing his gratitude and calling him Van. He suggested that he return home now that the struggle was over. Van accepted this with a gentle smile, and he asked him to spend time with his family. He went to a secluded house far from the royal court. The first thing he did was wash off the dust of the road. His idea of a day of rest was rather peculiar. With a lantern in his hand, he walked through familiar corridors. He entered his private study, a place of intense preparation. Books on magical theory piled up on the table, and wooden mannequins awaited his training. He looked at the anatomical diagram. The battle was over, and his memory took him back to his conversation with Heinz. He had spoken then about the most powerful magicians they were about to encounter, the elite of the kingdom. Magicians, swordsmen, and warriors. But even then, young Wang was adamant. He declared that he intended to study magic. He was shocked, reminding himself that he had no magical abilities. He promised to know magic better than anyone else in the world, and to perfect a martial art capable of countering it. He said this with such confidence, as if it were easy, a determination that he only admired. In the present, he was leafing through a worn book. The road to this moment had been long. The next day, Wang walked through the bright, bustling city. A merchant shouted prices to passers-by. Wang's gaze lingered on a rare fruit, the perfect gift to take home. He imagined a smiling girl, remembering how much she loved them. The thought brought a warm smile to his face, but it was interrupted. The merchant's friendliness vanished. He pointed to a sign, refusing to sell to Galda. Van's face darkened under his hood. He simply showed 2 silver coins. The merchant's greed quickly overcame his prejudice. Van held the money in front of him, asking if it was valid here. but others noticed his presence. They whispered about how Gald walked so freely, warning others to stay away, as if the absence of magic were a disease. But Wang knew better. You can't be infected by something that isn't a disease. The Galda were the only race born without magic, a history of oppression established by ancient kings. They were systematically used for labor and war. When the discontent of the people grew, the Galda became a convenient scapegoat. The memory of the injustice he had suffered made the protagonist's blood boil. He wondered if his people would ever be able to gain their freedom. At that moment, the voice of a little girl rang out. She stumbled and fell while playing in the street, and then began to cry. The main character softened his expression of concern and bent down to make sure she was okay. The girl looked up and noticed his scarlet eyes. He confirmed this with a slight nod, but instead of fear, her face lit up with admiration. The main character was completely taken aback by her reaction. She thanked him and ran back to her friends. The main character believed that this country could be changed. Moreover, he and Heinz were going to change it. This became the beginning of their shared dream. He finally came home, admitting that he was very late. He remembered how 10 years had passed and hoped that they would be happy to see him. His thoughts returned to the day he left. His mother teased him, saying that it would be good to find a wife. His younger sister Lena fully supported this idea. His mother told him to devote all his energy to his journey, but reminded him that if it became too difficult, he could always come home. Lena promised that his favorite soup would be waiting for him. That was a compelling argument. They said goodbye with warm hugs and a gift, a red pendant that he still kept with him. He smiled, warmed by the memory. He took his last steps toward the village, but what lay before him was absolute horror. His house, his entire village, was engulfed in flames. His mind could not comprehend the scale of the destruction. He rushed toward the flames, his heart pounding in his chest. He called out, trying to find out if anyone had survived. He found a body on the ground and rushed to the fallen villager, but it was too late. His eyes widened in horror at what he saw next. The bodies of his people lay like a cruel warning. He found another victim, lying lifeless in the grass. His mind tried to comprehend the carnage, but a desperate hope flared up inside him. His mother and Lena were not among the dead. He ran through the flames, calling out to them. From the hill he looked down, seeing the source of the smoke, and his world collapsed in an instant. He could only silently utter his mother's name in disbelief. He stretched out his trembling hand, unable to accept what he had seen. She had been turned into a monstrous example for all to see. A silent scream grew in his mind. He fell to the ground, his mind rejecting what was happening. But a faint voice broke through his despair, calling for his brother. He noticed Lena, wounded but alive, in the tall grass. She tried to stay conscious, then fell. The main character rushed to her, begging her to hold on. She had just enough strength left to warn him to run. She said that the attackers were looking for him. The main character tried to figure out if they could be the second prince's people, but he knew that was impossible. He held Lena, asking her to save her strength, promising to take her to safety. But then he saw the ground beneath her, and realized with growing horror that she had lost too much blood. Lena had one more wish. She remembered how she had learned to cook with their mother, and with tears in her eyes, she regretted that she wanted him to try her soup. The main character could only watch, feeling his heart break into 1,000 pieces. A single tear rolled down her cheek. She reached out to touch his face one last time. In her eyes was love and warmth that surpassed the pain. She told him that he was not to blame for anything. And with her last breath, her hand fell. The main character held her lifeless body, whispering her name in the night. His moment of grief was interrupted by a sword passing through his back. The knight stabbed him while he held his dead sister. The knight's companions cheered, celebrating the cowardly attack. They declared victory over the main character, whom they considered the leader of the uprising. But the knight was shocked that the main character was still standing. Cold, silent fury burned in his eyes. The knight had one last question. He asked if the main character had deliberately taken the fatal blow. The main character's gaze was fixed, his thoughts far away. He said that he had nothing left, that there was nothing worth living for. The knight felt sorry for him and raised his sword for the final blow. But the main character had a question of his own. He demanded to know who had given the order for this massacre. The knight smirked, revealing that it was a royal order, a sacred decision that the Gald were no longer needed. The main character screamed, refusing to believe that his friend could have done this. At that moment, a familiar voice broke through the chaos. Heinz calmly walked through the flames. The protagonist's shock turned to utter disbelief. He walked past the knights, reproaching the main character for being late, even joking about buying souvenirs. He could only ask her one question. He asked why. She looked at him without the slightest regret and said that it was all his fault. He explained that invisible killers like him, and not the magical race that had created him, were a threat to the kingdom's peace, and therefore had to be completely destroyed. The truth hit him like a blow. He had been used. Heinz claimed that he would fulfill his promise to end discrimination by destroying the Gald completely. As the knight's sword came down for the final blow, the protagonist stopped the blade with his bare hand. The knight froze in complete shock. Heinz called the main character a monster, unleashing her power, but her soldier only snorted mockingly, confident in his superiority. The rest rushed forward, shouting about protecting their king. But the protagonist turned into a blurred stream of movement, a storm of retribution. He prepared Galda's secret technique, a last desperate move called absolute blossoming. At the same time, Heinz prepared her spell, the highest arrow of pure light. The two former friends collided in an explosion of power, and the world was blinded by a flash. After that, his knights lay defeated. Contrary to all expectations, the main character was still standing. He looked ahead with a cold, detached gaze, continuing to cover his sister's body. Heinz noted that he would not kneel even in the face of death, calling him a fool for his unyielding principles. He said goodbye to him, acknowledging that his strength had been a mistake in his calculations. After that, his body finally gave up. He sank into darkness after a long period of unconsciousness, but was found by a strange wolf-like creature with scarlet eyes. It decided to give him one last chance. While his life hung in the balance, the creature told him that next time he had to do better. A mysterious red energy flowed into him. He awoke in a daze, staring at his own feet. He raised his hand, wondering if he was even alive. Looking around the unfamiliar room, he noticed a stone column that seemed strangely familiar. A familiar voice asked if he had finally woken up. It was Lena, alive and unharmed, teasing him about his sleepiness. She said that his mother had prepared a feast in honor of the holiday, reminding him that today was his birthday. His mother joined them, saying that he was now 15 years old. He looked at his reflection, seeing himself as he was 10 years ago. Before him was the memory of a peaceful day, of a life he thought he had lost forever. He was completely stunned by this impossible reality. His family was here, safe and sound, enjoying a beautiful day. He wondered if everything that had happened was just a bad dream. He looked at the village, intact and untouched by fire. But as he moved, he felt a strange force flowing through his body. A flower petal slowly fell from the sky. He froze, feeling the peace around him. Clenching his fist, he felt that the power of his future self was still with him, and caught the petal with impossible speed and accuracy. He stared at it in amazement while Lena watched from the sidelines. With icy clarity, he understood that this was not a dream. The memory of the burning village remained vivid. Lena's last words echoed in his mind. The betrayal of his closest friend and the burning pain of the blade that ended his life. It was all real, a future that he had somehow survived. He looked at his hands, the hands of a boy with the soul of a murderer. Lena asked if everything was okay. The main character forced himself to smile, assuring her that everything was fine. His mother called them, announcing that the meal was ready, and for a moment he allowed himself to enjoy this impossible gift, celebrating with his family. At the same time, elsewhere, a group of horsemen galloped through the forest. At the head of the group rode a determined young woman with green eyes. She questioned the knight's actions, concerned about civilian casualties, but her subordinate assured her that their target was the Gald area. Her gaze reflected grim determination. The knight sneered, calling the people of Gald cattle rather than citizens. A cold fury flashed across her face for a moment. She said nothing more, only ordered them to speed up. Returning to the past, the main character tasted a spoonful of soup, lost in the familiar taste. His mother teased him about his sentimentality, wondering why a simple dish evoked such emotions in him. Lena proudly announced that she had helped with the cooking this time. The main character joked about the lumpy vegetables and received a playful blow from his sister for it. His mother looked at them with a heart full of warmth. But the main character's thoughts were far away. He continued to reflect on his return to the past, wondering if this was really a chance to start all over again. His mother's voice interrupted his thoughts, calling his name. She asked if he was still worried about choosing his future. He was lost for a moment, remembering that at the age of 15, every man in Gald was obliged to choose his path. Without a family business, the options were limited. He could stay in the village and do low-paying work, or leave and face contempt and exhausting labor elsewhere. The third path was to become a mercenary, a risky bet with high rewards. Devoid of magic, the Galda possessed incredible physical strength. Their inability to be detected by magic made them ideal scouts, but it also turned them into expendable cannon fodder on the front lines. A grim reminder of the fate of most of them. And yet for the few who survived, wealth awaited. He remembered his mother's embrace, her quiet fear. She admitted that his father's earnings allowed the family to survive, but the thought of losing her son was unbearable to her. The main character knew how high the mortality rate was and understood that it was a desperate choice for survival. In his first life, he had chosen this path, and it had led him to the top. He remembered the moment he met him, the burning determination in his eyes, and the steady gaze of the young royal who became his friend. But the memory was interrupted by a sharp, alarming sound. The village bell rang out across the district, a clear sign of danger. The main character looked at his house, and a terrible realization came over him. He remembered an important detail that he had completely forgotten. He jumped up from the table, warning his family to stay away from the center of the village, but they followed him. He turned around, asking where he was going. A scene flashed in his mind of a gathering of people in robes, fanatics preaching sin. Their leader called for purification to protect the purity of blood. He remembered how their distorted words echoed through the streets, how they branded gold as a disgusting abomination, a darkness that must be burned out of the kingdom. He knew who they were, the Purification Sect, a fundamentalist group within the kingdom's main religion. Their ideology was so radical that even the church declared them heretics. One of the sect's core beliefs was that the Gald were demons who must be destroyed, and on the day of the main character's 15th birthday, they came to his house. After being expelled from the capital, the fanatics headed straight for the Gala district. With no real defense, the city was easily captured and subjected to purification. In his first life, the main character could only hide with his family, remaining a frightened boy, powerless to stop the massacre. But this time, everything was going to be completely different. He moved with predatory grace, tracking down his prey. He descended from the rooftops like a ghost, landing silently, a killer in the body of a child. The cult leader continued his sermon, promising to cleanse the city. He held a torch to the captive, calling it a purifying flame. However, his speech was interrupted by a shadow falling from above. The main character remembered the first rule of fighting magicians: a sudden attack beyond their perception and one decisive blow to a vital point. The leader fell without even realizing what was happening. His followers froze in disbelief. The child had just destroyed the sect's most powerful mage. One of the fanatics lit his blade, consumed by rage, but the main character was already nearby, turning the weapon against its owner. He knew that only a weapon imbued with magic could pierce a mage's defenses, and if he didn't have one, he could simply borrow it. Another member of the sect began to prepare a lightning spell, but he was too slow for spells that required words to be spoken. The main character closed the distance in an instant. His gaze was cold, his aim was perfect, and another fanatic was out of the fight. He looked up at the remaining three, almost finishing what he had started, but a voice from the arched passageway made him freeze. A new participant entered the game, holding a civilian hostage. The main character realized his mistake, having forgotten about those left behind. He weighed his options, realizing it was a trap. The fanatic told the woman that her fate had been decided and ordered her to blame the boy for her own death. The main character shouted, begging them to wait. He fell to his knees, raising his hands in surrender. The coward smiled, considering himself the winner. He pushed the woman away and rushed toward the main character to deliver the fatal blow. But from the fanatic's point of view, something was wrong. He looked down and saw that the boy was completely unharmed. The attacker himself was lying on the ground, completely immobilized. The remaining two fanatics saw this and vowed to make him pay. The last one was overcome with a sense of foreboding. He saw a monstrous aura around the boy and urged his companions to act quickly. But his partner decided to act on his own. At that moment, a new voice rang out across the square, and an icy spell was cast. A wave of frost covered the fanatic, catching him off guard. He was instantly frozen in place, unable to move. Next, a green-eyed woman appeared from the forest along with the knights, ordering them not to break the ice. She announced that the fanatics were under arrest by order of the kingdom. The man realized with horror that the royal guard had arrived. The main character was shocked. In his past life, help had come much later. The frozen fanatic shouted, ordering his men to attack the woman, but it was useless. They were all already frozen in ice. The woman calmly reminded them that the battle was over and ordered her people to take the prisoners into custody. Thus, the threat was neutralized. The main character could only watch, realizing that his plans had been completely disrupted. The woman turned her attention to him and noticed with surprise that she was looking at a child. She was amazed that the boy had managed to defeat 3 magicians on his own. The main character looked away, unaccustomed to such attention. Her sharp green eyes seemed to see right through him. A slight smile of gratitude appeared on her face. She knelt down, expressing her gratitude and explaining that the fire mage he had defeated could have destroyed the entire city. The main character looked again at the defeated leader, and the memory of the burning village remained too fresh. She acknowledged that his sudden attack had saved countless lives. And at that moment, the main character realized the connection. It was because he had acted that the kingdom had responded more quickly. She offered a reward, but he refused, needing nothing. He only expressed his gratitude for their timely arrival. Intrigued by the boy, the woman reached out her hand, wanting to know his name. She introduced herself as Helen and made an offer that was impossible to believe, an invitation to the Magic Academy. The main character froze in silence. The Magic Academy was a place he had never dared to dream of. Helen explained that it was a prestigious educational institution founded by 3 states to seek out talent regardless of origin. The main character knew this name well from his past life. Many of the world's greatest heroes were its graduates, as were the most powerful magicians. An obvious question arose in his mind about the reason for such a choice. Helen's gaze became sharp and appraising. She suggested finding a more secluded place to talk. Without waiting for an answer, she grabbed his wrist and pulled him along. The main character was taken aback by her determination. She admitted that it was her first time here, and asked him to show her the way. A barely noticeable, understanding smile appeared on the main character's lips. He led her through the quiet, overgrown ruins. They stopped at a secluded spot near a stream. He confirmed that it was indeed quiet here, just as she wanted. But her tone turned cold when she noted that this was exactly the kind of place where death would go unnoticed. Suddenly, a huge magic circle flared up around her. The main character's eyes widened, and he realized that this was a test. She fired a powerful ice arrow at him, but in a blurred movement, he was already behind her. Helen was shocked because she felt the absence of instant teleportation magic and realized that he had used pure physical technique to enter her blind spot. His scarlet eyes burned with tension as he held her by the arm. She calmly noted that she did not sense any intention to kill in him and therefore saw no reason to stop what was happening. She also noticed that he thought and acted like a seasoned warrior. The main character came to the conclusion that everything that was happening was indeed a test. She confirmed this, admitting that she preferred to see things for herself, and now she was convinced that he was capable of fighting magicians relying solely on his skill. He did not understand what significance this had. She believed that he could be the one to change the fate of his people. This thought stunned the main character, as did the possible future she spoke of, claiming that it was achievable if he enrolled in the academy. He realized that it was not just about education, but about knighthood. Helen was surprised by his knowledge of the system and confirmed that with his abilities, he was capable of earning this title. The system, known as Knight's Honor, rewarded the best students. It gave the right to establish a new noble house. Helen explained that the territory granted was often linked to the candidate's origins, meaning that the protagonist could become the official lord of his own city. The realization of this possibility weighed heavily on him. He pondered the offer, realizing that he had never completely ruled out this path, and unlike in his first life, he was still young enough to try. However, before making a decision, he had 3 questions. Helen was pleased and allowed him to ask them. First, he pointed out that the entrance exam required a recommendation from a nobleman. She assured him that this issue had already been resolved. The protagonist was surprised by her enthusiasm. Then she eagerly awaited the second question. He reflected on the absurdity of the situation, a non-magical boy applying for knighthood at a magic academy. She agreed that the path was unusual, but explained that all those who had been awarded this title had one thing in common. All of them went beyond tradition and discovered a new principle of magic. This could be the creation of magical medicine or the study of magic circles. She explained that the principle of magic lies not only in the use of magic itself, and that the subjugation of magicians without it is also a worthy path to knighthood. The main character only needed to prove his uniqueness to the world. He struggled to comprehend this complex concept. Then she moved on to the last question. Her gaze was intense, expectant. The main character, however, was not naive. He wanted to know what she would get in return. She feigned surprise, as if doubting his trust. He made it clear that he needed to understand her benefit. Helen paused and admitted that there was indeed a benefit, but refused to reveal it. The main character's suspicion grew. A tense silence hung between them in the abandoned ruins. At that moment, their conversation was interrupted by a familiar voice. Lena ran towards them with a worried expression on her face. She had heard that the main character was fighting bad people, and he tried to calm her down. He regretted making her worry and assured her that he was fine. However, his sister did not believe him for a moment. She hugged him tightly and reproached him for his constant recklessness, reminding him how much she and their mother had worried. The main character just hugged her back, feeling the weight of her words. Helen watched this scene from afar. In the end, she noted that trust was not necessary, but if he became a knight, he would be able to legally protect his family. She swore to this by her own name, Helen Steinartz. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving the main character to ponder his unexpected path. He hugged his sister tighter, having already made up his mind. He remembered his mother's sad expression when she learned about the fight. His mother praised him, saying that he was very much like his father, and she said this with a gentle, understanding smile. Later, the main character told his family about the Academy's offer, which stunned them. He mentioned the recommendation and the path to knighthood, but his loved ones were worried that he would end up among magicians. He explained that this was precisely why he had to follow this path. Lena looked at him in bewilderment, not understanding his arguments. He was determined to prove that the Gala were in no way inferior to others. He had been thinking about this for days, unable to find any other way to save his people. His former path as an assassin was closed, and trust in the royal authority no longer existed. He understood that he was not capable of opposing the kingdom alone, and Helen's offer was his only chance. And since he had already died once, danger no longer frightened him. He was ready to seize any opportunity to end the discrimination against his people. His mother and sister could only listen in silence. Struck by his determination, his mother's eyes widened as she saw the fire in his gaze as he sat before her. Before her was no longer a boy, but a man with a purpose. With a sigh, she realized that it was impossible to stop him. He lowered his gaze, asking if she could forgive his decision. She understood that even if she tried to hold him back, he would not listen. Wiping away a tear, she acknowledged that stubbornness ran in their family. The main character looked up and expressed simple, sincere gratitude. However, his mother reminded him of one important thing: tuition fees. She reminded him that a prestigious education does not come free. And then the main character realized that he had completely forgotten about money. His mother sighed, resigning herself to the fact that she would have to solve this problem somehow. Lena immediately volunteered to go to work, but the main character quickly dismissed this idea, realizing that there were no well-paid jobs in their small town. As it turned out, the money issue was resolved quite simply. Helen appeared with a reward for destroying the sect, which she had not mentioned before. Standing next to his family, she also said that there was something else he should know. His mother warned him about the difficulties that lay ahead, but asked him to always remember that he remained her pride and joy. The main character promised that he would do everything possible. Lena added that his favorite soup would be waiting for him when he returned. He stroked her head, looking forward to that moment, and saying goodbye, turned to leave. His family watched him go on his new journey. He waved back, vowing that this time he would keep his promise. So he strode toward a future that had previously seemed impossible. Soon, he arrived at the legendary Magic Academy, a place he knew only from stories from his past life. Inside, the halls were filled with students eager for knowledge. One young nobleman presented a letter of recommendation and was admitted without delay. Then, another student with the support of the nobility also passed inside. When it was the protagonist's turn, he was immediately stopped by a guard. The other students began to whisper, recognizing Gal's eyes with disgust. The main character sighed, already tired of familiar prejudices. He calmly explained that he had come for the exam. The guard scoffed, doubting whether he even understood where he was. The main character confirmed that he did understand, referring to the Academy's open policy. The guard flew into a rage, accusing him of insolence. A blade was held to the main character's throat, but he remained completely unperturbed. He knew he could end this conflict, but it would cost him his chance. At that moment, 2 more guards approached. The main character hoped for reason, but the elderly guard only complained about the degenerating generations. He explained that the Academy did not discriminate based on status, but required a recommendation from a nobleman of the kingdom. When the main character said he had such a recommendation, the guard froze in shock. He presented a letter with an official seal. The guard's eyes widened at the sight of the seal, but his surprise quickly turned to anger, and he accused the protagonist of forgery. He lunged forward, trying to snatch the letter, calling it a crime. The main character's expression did not change. With one smooth movement, he knocked the attacker off his feet, sending him to the ground. The other guards and students could only watch in amazement. His partner asked what had happened, but the fallen guard insisted that the boy had done something. At that moment, the noise was interrupted by a new voice. The guard stood at attention, recognizing the examiner. He tried to listen to the explanation, which shifted the blame onto the main character. The examiner with purple hair was simply interested in his name. The main character introduced himself, pointing to the recommendation from Helen Steinertz. The name alone made an almost magical impression, and the other students were shocked. The examiner personally checked the letter and confirmed the authenticity of the seal and the Steinertz family crest. He apologized for the guard's rudeness and invited the main character inside. The crowd whispered, unable to believe what they had heard. Even the guards wondered who this boy really was. The main character noticed a sharp change in attitude towards him, and realized that Helen's influence was much greater than he had imagined. He walked through the gates, surveying the huge academy. This place was filled with the elite, but his gaze remained firm, and his determination unshakable. He recognized a young swordsman named Dietrich from his past life. Then his gaze narrowed when he noticed another familiar face, the great flame mage Shea, and the holy maiden of divine power, Lunaris. He realized that they were all graduates of this academy. His bloody past flashed through his mind. Unlike him, they were the kingdom's celebrated heroes. But in the war for the throne, they became rotten pawns. And in the end, they fell, like everyone else. He remembered that it was he who had put an end to them. However, in this life, he would compete with them openly. And if he succeeded, he would be able to change the world. However, his thoughts were interrupted by an arrogant voice. The young nobleman demanded an explanation as to why the main character was standing there. The main character calmly made it clear that he could be wherever he wanted. The nobleman flew into a rage at this perceived insolence and invoked his noble birth, demanding recognition. The protagonist briefly considered simply bowing his head and avoiding unnecessary trouble, but he remembered his mother's words about the need to live with dignity. Another person who had said the same thing to him came to mind. Heinz insisted that equality was never achieved by bowing down and urged him to act with dignity, calling him her hope. The nobleman's cry brought him back to the present. He grabbed the protagonist by the collar, demanding attention. The protagonist's gaze turned cold as he noted who had attacked first. The nobleman was stunned by his calm resistance. With a barely noticeable smile, the protagonist grabbed his wrists and with a smooth movement sent his opponent to the ground. He remembered a technique taught by the director, using the enemy's strength against him. As with the guard, the other students could only watch in amazement. The protagonist even extended his hand to the nobleman he had just knocked down, with a mocking expression, as if offering help. The nobleman jumped to his feet, seething with rage, but his attack was stopped by a powerful magical intervention. The other students froze, stunned by the sudden turn of events. Even the main character was taken aback by the appearance of the new man. A young man with blonde hair stepped forward, calling for unity. He motioned for the embarrassed nobleman to rise, calling what was happening unsightly, and asked that he be treated as a normal candidate. Then he turned his attention to the main character with a friendly smile. At that moment, the main character realized with shock that Prince Heinz was standing before him. The crowd began to whisper, recognizing the ninth prince with reverence. He was praised for his fairness and for taking the exam on equal terms with everyone else, as well as for his tolerance in communicating with the Agala. A long-forgotten conversation came to the protagonist's mind. He remembered how Hintz had mentioned that she had once studied at the academy, and now this fact took on a frightening significance. The young prince approached, noting the protagonist's tension and admitting that he felt the same way because of the exam's reputation. He held out his hand, offering to take on the challenge together. The main character looked at this gesture, at the disarming smile, so warm that it could win over anyone and make them open their soul. But he knew the truth. He knew about the cold, calculating monster hiding behind that mask. He realized that right here and now he could finish off his greatest enemy. However, he held back, knowing that it would ruin his own plans. He clenched his fist, reminding himself why he had come here. Heinz noticed his hesitation and drew attention to it. The main character simply turned away, making it clear that he had no intention of making friends. The prince remained with his hand outstretched, his offer rejected. He slowly lowered his hand, and a look of surprise flashed across his face. The other students began to whisper, calling the main character a beast for his lack of politeness, and the humiliated nobleman could only silently seethe with rage. However, this drama was quickly interrupted by an official announcement. The examiner announced that the candidates would be taken to the Shadow Forest, a name that immediately made the other students nervous, while the main character's expression remained unchanged. They were led into a huge forest saturated with magic, the venue for the first test. A more imposing examiner welcomed them to the site and confirmed that this was where the exam would take place, reminding them that the academy only accepted the best of the best, and that this test was designed to weed out those who were unprepared. The main character listened attentively, memorizing every word. Their task was to find a rare magical flower called Tears of Heaven, but the examiner warned that the animals living in the forest were also endowed with magic and extremely dangerous. The main character was a little surprised that they were being thrown into a practical combat exam so early on. The examiner explained the rules. Cooperation was allowed, but sabotage was prohibited. The catch was that the group had to collect enough flowers for each participant so that everyone could pass. With a smirk, he warned that large groups would face great difficulties, and they only had until sunset. Another examiner came forward with the last item, a security token. He explained that breaking it would summon a rescuer in case of danger, but using the token would result in immediate disqualification. After explaining the rules, the exam officially began. The students immediately began to form alliances. The confident nobles and mages quickly united, leaving the main character alone, as he had expected. This did not bother him, as it was much easier to move around alone. When he entered the forest, he was closely watched. He was given a security token, and with it, the main character walked into the ominous forest alone, while the previously humiliated nobleman watched him from the shadows. The first test was not long in coming. The main character calmly assessed the threat, a medium-sized demon beast. These creatures were animals imbued with powerful magic, and their enhanced abilities made them more dangerous than many mages. The beast lunged forward with a furious roar. The main character realized that in his past life, he had mostly fought against humans. He planted his foot firmly on the ground, took the attack head-on, and delivered a crushing blow to the creature's chest. It was a technique against beasts known as a crushing blow, a move designed to bypass defenses and cause internal damage. His scarlet eyes burned with concentration as he assessed his opponent's weaknesses. He knew that this technique was difficult to use against an attentive enemy, but it was perfect against a mindless demon beast. The creature collapsed to the ground, defeated by a single blow. He remembered encountering similar creatures back in his mercenary days. He knew exactly how to destroy them, and that was extremely bad news for them. However, he soon sensed that he was not alone in the forest. He scratched the back of his head, deliberately feigning confusion in front of his audience. The nobleman and his companion could only stare in amazement at what they had just witnessed. The nobleman snorted contemptuously, believing that the protagonist had used some kind of poison. His companion looked much more nervous and reminded him that interference was prohibited by the rules. But the nobleman insisted that the rules were only for show. He claimed that the examiners would never allow the Agala to pass anyway, especially someone who dared to show disrespect to the prince. With a smirk, he decided that no one would blame them if they eliminated the main character. Meanwhile, in a dark underground corridor, an agitated guard led a figure in a robe forward. The figure declared his intention to eliminate one specific person, the beast who dared to enter their glorious academy. He explained that although they could not reject the recommendation, they were quite capable of arranging accidents for some candidates. He didn't care if anyone else got hurt along the way. He noted that the Agala boy moved around completely alone, confident that no one would willingly approach him. However, the two henchmen in the background mentally disagreed with this. Deep within the academy, a heavy lock was opened, and the examiner released a cursed beast from its confinement, ordering it to destroy the Agala and protect the honor of the academy. A monstrous shadow with burning eyes responded to the call. At the same time, the purple-haired examiner sensed an alarming change in the air. He admitted that he had a very bad feeling about this year's exam. His colleague asked if there was a problem, but he replied that everything was fine. The bearded examiner just smiled, saying that he was preparing for the next stage, but the smile did not reach his eyes, and the second examiner's suspicions only grew stronger. Returning to the sun-dappled forest, the main character continued his search. He moved silently through the undergrowth and suddenly stopped, his eyes wide open. Before him was a patch of glowing flowers, exactly as described. He was convinced that these were the flowers of heaven's tears. He knew that picking them meant passing the test. However, first he noticed two students following him. The nobleman smiled, surprised that he had been noticed, and made a rude remark. The main character only responded with a calm smile, implying that experience was the reason for everything and that cowards were always predictable. He coolly admitted that he knew this well, since he himself had been a murderer in the past. The nobleman declared that they would prove that the main character was unworthy of the academy. But the protagonist instantly cut off all excuses, calling what was happening what it really was: revenge. His eyes flashed with determination as he promised to knock that petty pride out of his opponent. The nobleman stammered, completely stunned by such confidence. The main character calmly assessed his opponents, the swordsman and the mage. He mentally reviewed the three main fighting styles. First, the spellcaster, then the magical swordsman who strengthened his weapon with energy, and finally, the fighter who strengthened his own body. He knew that combining different styles was a classic, albeit predictable, strategy. The nobleman snorted derisively, believing that the main character had no real combat experience. He acknowledged that they had the will to fight, but he couldn't just eliminate them. If an Agala died during the exam, it would be just an accident. But if a nobleman fell, his family would demand explanations and stop at nothing to get revenge. He knew very well that the nobility of this kingdom was not to be trifled with. Besides, this time he had chosen a different path. He was going to break their spirit, not their bodies. A much more elegant and satisfying victory. The nobleman was boiling with rage at his calmness and, with a furious cry, unleashed a powerful wind spell. A stream of invisible blades rushed forward, but the protagonist dodged them with impossible speed. The nobleman was stunned. admitting that he was much faster than he seemed, and proudly declared that his family's magic was an invisible blade for those deprived of magic. He offered the protagonist a chance to kneel and beg for forgiveness. Wang asked with lazy contempt whether his opponent's family craft was to serve the royal halls as a living air conditioner. The insult instantly destroys what remains of the nobleman's composure, and blind rage overwhelms his mind. He unleashes a much more powerful attack, a whirlwind saturated with deadly magic, which roars, tears off leaves, rips up the ground, and destroys everything in its path. But in the next moment, the mage freezes, realizing the impossible. Wang looks directly at the attack as if it were tangible. Wang's scarlet eyes flash with an ominous light as he senses the intent to kill directed at him, and before his opponent has time to realize what is happening, Wang closes the distance almost instantly and delivers a flawlessly accurate strike, sending the confident nobleman flying and completely incapacitating him. His partner can only watch in horror as his comrade falls, before gritting his teeth and preparing his own attack, explaining with feigned confidence that a magic sword without its owner is just a piece of metal, but dodging a blow from a blade is much more difficult than dodging a normal fist. However, Van's lightning-fast footwork and superhuman reflexes belie these words. He does not try to parry the sword, does not retreat, and does not defend himself. He aims directly at the wrist, depriving his opponent of control over his weapon and demonstrating the perfect counterattack against a sword-wielding mage. With cold, calculated concentration, devoid of emotion, Wang completes the movement, and the second nobleman falls to the ground, realizing his own insignificance and cursing his weakness. Wang looks down at the defeated men and calmly asks if they have had enough humiliation, warning them that from now on, he will no longer hold back, and only now does the threat reach their consciousness. Their self-confidence disappears, replaced by animal fear, and the swordsman begins to beg for mercy. At that moment, Wang senses a sharp and disturbing distortion in the surrounding space, his instincts screaming danger, and he looks back sharply, realizing that something much more terrifying than their pathetic attempts at self-assertion is happening. He shouts, ordering the nobles to get away immediately, but the warning comes too late. From the depths of the forest, a monstrous beast bursts forth with a deafening roar, breaking trees as if they were dry twigs, and all three freeze, paralyzed by primal terror. The creature attacks with overwhelming, unstoppable force, throwing two nobles aside like rag dolls, and even Wang is knocked off his feet, knocked off balance by the monstrous power of the blow. As he gets up, he immediately realizes the scale of the disaster. Before them stands the Hellboar, the supreme demonic beast, whose appearance in this forest is impossible by all known rules. Its eyes burn with pure destructive energy, and Wang knows that the next attack will be even faster and more deadly. This monster is called the Cursed Fang, and its power is comparable to siege magic capable of wiping fortresses off the face of the earth. Wang grits his teeth and orders the nobles to flee while there is still a chance. But the arrogant mage, stripped of all dignity, admits in horror that his legs won't obey him, and Wang instantly realizes that he now has two burdens on his shoulders. Wang quickly assesses the situation, realizing that it is impossible to carry them away, and the beast will not retreat, and even using the signal badge remains a dangerous gamble, because help may not arrive in time. One of the nobles unexpectedly orders his friend to run and save himself, declaring that he will fight alone, and these words sound like a death sentence. His companion, stunned by this sudden display of bravery, refuses, saying that abandoning his comrade would mean forever disgracing the name of his house. Wang witnesses a rare moment of genuine, albeit belated nobility, and orders them to break the badge and call for reinforcements, promising to buy them time. The nobleman hesitates, realizing that this means immediate failure in the exam, but decides that tarnishing the family name is worse than death itself. And together with his friends, overcoming the pain, he rises, declaring his readiness to fight and die with honor. Wang looks at them with obvious irritation, and calls such pride cheap and meaningless, causing a flash of rage, but immediately coolly remarks that if one is to fight, one should fight for victory. For is this not the true pride of a royal nobleman? And although the answer sounds contemptuous, the words clearly hit the mark. Meanwhile, the hellish boar gathers energy for a new charge, and far away, the bearded examiner smirks, feeling that everything is going according to his plan, because no one has called for help. This means that Van's elimination is going perfectly. The monster roars and lunges forward, and Van, without wasting a second, gives the order to attack at his signal. But the nobleman refuses to obey Sumgal, and it is too late to argue. Van rushes toward the blow, completely focused and preparing his strongest technique, combining precision and crushing power. He delivers a direct blow to the beast's head, the source of its movement, A perfect counterattack, executed without a single mistake, but reality proves to be merciless. The blow doesn't even break the skin, and Wang realizes a forgotten fact. He is only 15, and his body does not yet possess the strength of the future. He shouts at the others to attack, and the mage unleashes his signature wind spell, saturating it with cutting power. Meanwhile, the swordsman lunges forward with his blade filled with lightning, but their attacks only barely wound the beast and only fuel its fury. The hellboar releases its accumulated energy in the form of a destructive shockwave. Wang barely has time to brace himself for the blow, after which he checks on the others and makes sure they are alive, though completely exhausted. The mage admits that his spell only slightly weakened the blow, and the swordsman realizes in despair that his weapon is useless. But Wang, despite the pain and fatigue, gets up and declares that they will try again, shocking everyone with his confidence. He gives clear instructions to add stones and earth to the wind stream to increase its destructive mass, and orders the swordsman to aim for the ribs and stab, not chop, then coldly announces the plan. Use him as bait while they deliver the decisive blow or escape. The nobleman smiles, agreeing not to hold back, but Wang makes it clear that he is not interested in revenge, for his goal is to earn recognition for his family and his people, and he cannot achieve this by abandoning his compatriots. These words leave the nobleman speechless, forcing him to remember his own arrogance and Wang's quiet dignity, and for the first time in his life, he feels a burning shame. But this brief moment is interrupted. The hellboar prepares to attack again, and the outcome of their battle is still undecided. The beast roared again, filling the forest with a rumble that shook the earth, and at that moment, Wang shouted at the top of his voice, ordering them to attack immediately, without hesitation. The noble mage, gritting his teeth and casting aside his fear, cast his own spell with a fierce, determined cry, and a giant whirlwind of sand, gravel, and stones burst from his magic circle, swirling with such force that it seemed as if the earth itself had risen up against the demonic beast. The new technique worked exactly as Wang had hoped. The torrent struck the hellboar in the face, blinding it and disorienting it, and at that moment, the swordsman lunged forward for the decisive blow. Wang grinned when he saw that his plan had worked perfectly, for the blinded beast began to rage, swinging its body and furiously throwing both nobles aside. In that brief moment of chaos, Wang saw his chance, lunged forward and gathering his last ounce of strength, jumped onto the beast's back, aiming precisely between its shoulder blades. He knew the anatomy of this beast. Its shoulder bones were not directly connected to its spine, which meant it was a vulnerable spot, and its flexible but unstable forelegs made it particularly vulnerable to losing its balance. Using this knowledge, Wang applied the rotation technique, sharply shifting the monster's center of gravity and directing its own mass against it, causing the huge carcass to crash to the ground with a roar. Wang yelled at the swordsman to act now, reminding him of the target, the heart located at the base of the front leg. The young nobleman, trembling with fear, gathered all his remaining magic and courage, his eyes widening as the blade came down with force, and he thrust the sword precisely into the weak spot. But a second later, his face contorted in disbelief. The blade was stuck, unable to penetrate deeper. He screamed, pouring every ounce of strength and every remnant of will into the blow, and the arrogant mage had already begun to celebrate his victory, confident that the fight was over. But Wang immediately realized that it was far from over. The blade had only grazed the beast's heart, inflicting a wound that was not fatal, but merely irritating, and it only enraged the hellhog. The monster went berserk, threw the swordsman aside, and let out a destructive roar, a special ability available only to the strongest demonic beasts. The magic-filled cry created a giant shockwave that swept away everything in its path, breaking trees and crushing the ground. The arrogant nobleman looked at his bloodied hand and realized that his body was no longer obeying him. His internal organs had been seriously damaged by the blow. The hellboar turned its fiery gaze on him, and the nobleman, unable to move, simply stared back, accepting his fate. But at the last moment, Wang lunged forward and stopped the monster's fang with his bare hands, then began to form a new harmonic technique, Spiral, a technique designed to redirect the enemy's power into the ground. However, looking into the beast's burning eyes, Wang realized a terrible truth. He would not be able to deflect all that power. The thought of using his hidden power flashed through his mind, realizing that this was his only chance. The nobleman looked at him in utter horror. When Wang shouted, ordering him to just run, he stumbled and began to flee as fast as his wounded legs would allow. The hellboar did not retreat and rushed straight at Wang, who gritted his teeth and prepared to take the blow. He tried to redirect the force, but it was monstrous, and Van was thrown back like a rag doll, dragged through the air and slammed into the ground with such force that his whole body shook. The swordsman panicked and shouted his name, but Van barked, ordering them not to approach. The beast loomed over him, preparing for one last crushing blow, raising a huge tree trunk to finish him off once and for all. Wang lowered his gaze, and his resolve became as firm as steel. He decided to unleash the power he had been hiding. Dark red energy began to flow from his heart, and the hellboar froze for a moment, sensing the change. Then a powerful burst of energy erupted from Wang's body, catching the beast off guard and throwing it back with a single shockwave. Van, breathing heavily, looked up, not fully understanding the nature of the magic he had just used. And at that very moment, a new figure appeared, declaring that the situation was on the verge of disaster. The nobles were shocked to recognize Prince Heinz and hastily shouted at her to stay away, but Van immediately understood who was behind it all and remarked with a cold smile that she could not leave, for it was her duty to protect them. The nobles were touched by her noble words, of course. But Wang's gaze remained icy, and memories of her previous betrayal came to mind, how she skillfully used beautiful words to win hearts before sending people to their deaths. She proposed joining forces against the enemy, but Wang only smiled and refused in an even voice, shocking everyone. Heinz looked at him, unable to believe what she had heard, and Wang calmly repeated that her help was not needed here, causing disbelief to flash in her eyes. The nobles immediately came to her defense, demanding respect, but Wang coldly stated that they would have already won if she hadn't interfered, and these words left them speechless. Heinz, holding back her emotions, asked if he really did not need her strength, and Wang, standing in front of the roaring beast, confirmed this, suggesting that she simply watch from the sidelines, as befits a royal personage. The hellboar scraped the ground with its hooves again, preparing for another lunge, and Wang loudly warned that the attack was about to begin. The three fighters lined up, forming an improvised team against an impossible enemy, and the noble's eyes no longer held their former arrogance, only tense determination. The arrogant mage gritted his teeth, vowing to land at least one accurate blow, but Wang stopped them, warning that haste would cost them their lives, saying that he had only one attempt left, and it would be enough. He ordered them to wait for his signal, and the two former bullies exchanged glances, now ready to follow his instructions without argument. Meanwhile, Heinz watched from afar with an unreadable expression on her face. Wang let out a battle cry, declaring that everything would now be decided, and the nobles shouted back in agreement, forgetting their former enmity, for nothing changes people like the prospect of imminent death. Wang acts for the sake of teamwork and abruptly breaks away, turning into a blur against the backdrop of the charging beast, reminding himself not to give in to panic and firmly deciding to win without resorting to the hidden power he had kept hidden for so long. His eyes glow faintly as he prepares a new technique, the lifting strike, and he meets the beast's fangs head-on, knowing full well that the hellboar has become more cautious and has already learned from its failed attacks. Now the beast acts more cunningly, using a tactical stabbing lunge with a hook, but Wang dodges the blow with a confident smirk, knowing that the window for a counterattack has narrowed, but still exists. The huge fang rushes just a few inches away from him, and Wang, jumping over it, turns in the air, avoiding the next blow, and then forcefully brings his foot down directly on the monster's head. The arrogant nobleman is shocked by his speed, but Heinz notices something more. She watches his every move with intense attention and realizes that Wang is using the highest level of movement technique without a single unnecessary gesture, a level she has only seen before in martial arts masters, and it makes her wonder who he really is. Wang continues his relentless pressure, attacking the beast again and again, not giving it a second to breathe, and although the nobleman admits that the spectacle is impressive, he realizes that this alone is not enough. Heinz also realizes that the furious onslaught is useless, because non-magical blows cannot pierce the monster's skin. And when the beast roars, it looks more annoyed than wounded, confirming that Wang's attacks are not doing any real damage. But Van just smirks, saying that this is exactly what he wanted, because his goal was not to hurt the beast, but to anger it. And the furious roar of the hellboar proves that the plan is working. His scarlet eyes narrow as he sees the moment he has been waiting for. And, landing on the monster's back, he shouts at the wind user to attack right now. The noble mage lets out a determined cry and unleashes his most powerful spell. And the wind, filled with sand and dust, rushes into the beast's airways, causing it to stumble, blind, and choke. Wang praises the spell's impeccable timing, lands in front of the monster, and prepares to end the fight by preparing his final technique, crushing double strike. He strikes with both hands simultaneously, directing all his remaining strength. The two blows merge into one powerful internal shockwave that tears the beast's body apart from within. The hellboar goes limp and falls, its eyes roll back, and it finally becomes clear. It is defeated. Wang smiles and tells the swordsman that now it is his turn. And the young nobleman, gathering his last strength, raises his sword and delivers the final blow, after which the huge monster finally collapses to the ground. The two nobles can only watch in silence, unable to believe that they have actually managed to survive and win. Wang lands softly nearby. The fight is over, but Heinz watches him leave, her eyes filled with shock and confusion. But Wang doesn't even glance at her. He has other priorities. He reaches out his hand to the fallen swordsman and asks if he is okay, and the guy, accepting the help, admits that he felt as if all his insides had been mixed up. Van calmly explains that the beast's roar was just a sound attack, which is easy to neutralize with the right understanding, and the swordsman smiles crookedly, promising to remember this lesson and never mess with such creatures again. When the immediate threat disappears, Wang remembers the exam and his eyes widen. The field of flowers was right in the center of their battle. Heinz points out the obvious. Only 2 flowers survived. Wang remembers the examiner's warning about large groups and finally understands the true nature of the test. The nobles exchange glances, knowing what to do next. And the swordsman, holding the 2 remaining flowers, offers one to Heinz, calling it his duty as a vassal, for which he is mocked by his arrogant comrade, who accuses him of sycophancy. He then turns and offers the last flower to Wang, who is surprised, but the young man insists, saying that this is how he repays his debt. The arrogant nobleman finally introduces himself as Folk, and his friend the swordsman calls himself Ralph, and Van, accepting this unexpected turn of events, also gives his name, extending his hand in response. However, Folk reminds him that if they fail the exam, this acquaintance will be meaningless. But Heinz suddenly kneels down next to the wilted flowers and, smiling gently, picks one of them up, using light magic to restore the plants, then hands the revived flowers to the nobles. Wang watches this from afar, a lone figure among the forest, and when Heinz turns to him with an unreadable expression on her face, he responds with a cold, direct gaze, noting that the sun is already setting and it is time for them to leave. Folk immediately reprimands him for disrespecting the prince. Old habits die hard, but Heinz just smiles and turns her attention to Wang, saying she has a question for him. She remarks that he used to cover his tracks, and Van calmly asks what she is getting at, after which she explains that it is a technique known as assassin etiquette. The nobles are shocked by this statement, and Heinz links his fighting style to this deeply ingrained habit and asks him directly if he is an assassin. Van's scarlet eyes narrow, a faint smile appears on his lips, and the question hangs in the air like a silent challenge. He looks up, considering his response, while Heinz explains his situation with a serious expression on his face. The king took foreign princesses as wives to strengthen his power, but her mother was a noblewoman from their own kingdom. This made Heinz the main target of her jealous half-brothers and sisters, and she admits that she never knows when the next assassination attempt will come. If Wang is indeed an agent of his enemies, then action must be taken immediately. Such a direct question slightly throws Wang off balance. He immediately realizes that his old habits have betrayed him at the worst possible moment, so he decides to play dumb. He just shrugs his shoulders, feigning nonchalance and claiming that he didn't even know about the existence of some assassin etiquette. But Heinz doesn't believe him for a second. The playful expression instantly disappears from Van's face, and he coldly remarks that if that's how she wants to see the situation, then so be it. Her gaze hardens. There is a sense of readiness for battle in the air, and in the next moment she soars upward, preparing to attack. Folk and Ralph can only freeze in complete shock, not understanding how things got this far. But Wang confidently plants his foot on the ground, ready to meet her head-on. Folk desperately shouts a warning. However, it is too late. Her gaze is fixed on Van, her intention is crystal clear. But he calmly puts his hand on her shoulder and stops her movement, as if it were not an attack by a prince, but a childish prank. He immediately says that it was just a joke and asks her not to look at him so frighteningly, leaving Folk and Ralph completely baffled as to what had just happened. Van apologizes for his bad manners, blaming it all on his rural upbringing, and stands before her with the look of a harmless, almost naive boy. But Heinz understands perfectly well that he deliberately ignored the opening she left. Wang forces himself to remain calm, even though his heart is pounding, because he realizes that she is testing him, and one mistake could cost him everything. She demands an answer again, and asks about his movements once more, directly asking if he is an assassin. Wang instantly comes up with a lie, referring to his training with Hela Steinart, explaining that she taught him to hide his techniques, since he fights mainly with his bare hands, and he mentally apologizes to Helen for dragging her into this mess. Heinz is stunned to hear the recommendation from the Steinart house, and Folk, equally shocked, explains that it is one of the powerful ducal houses, and both nobles suddenly realize how significant Hela really is. Heinz carefully considers the new information, remembering that she knows Helen as the Ice Flower, the best student with outstanding combat skills, and realizing that the Steinart family would never conspire against the throne. Folk suggest that they simply want to recruit Van to serve their house, but Haynes only smiles and admits that if she had met him first, she might have done the same. Van can only awkwardly thank her, but Heinz's gaze immediately becomes sharp again as she continues, stating that the real threat was the Hell Boar, and that they may have just saved her life, after which she expresses sincere gratitude, displaying royal dignity. Folk and Ralph are completely embarrassed and delighted, calling it a great honor, completely taking the bait, but Wong just smirks and clarifies that he did not fight for her at all. Folk immediately explodes with indignation, but Van calmly points at him in response, completely unperturbed. Heinz notes his audacity, which contrasts sharply with the behavior of the others, and asks him to repeat his name, keeping his eyes on him, wondering who this truly mysterious boy is. As the sun begins to set, the students start returning from the forest, and the first exam finally comes to an end. Folk and Ralph congratulate each other on passing the test, while another student despairs, wondering how he will now be able to look his father in the eye. The bearded examiner demands a final count of the remaining participants and discovers with disbelief that the results look extremely strange. Heinz reflects on the exam, knowing that the demonic beast should have been much weaker, and wonders if something unexpected happened to the creature she released. At that moment, someone shouts that someone is coming out of the forest, and the bearded examiner looks up eagerly, asking if it is the prince, but Wong emerges from the thicket with a cheerful smile, calmly wondering if everyone has gathered to greet him. The examiner's face contorts with pure, genuine shock, while Wong calmly looks back and casually walks out of the forest as if nothing special has happened, leaving the examiner to watch him go with his plan completely ruined. His colleague greets Wong, but in the bearded examiner's head, there is only a silent scream. Why is he still alive? Wong turns around and asks with a mischievous smile if it's bad that he survived. The examiner quickly regains his composure, saying that he is simply impressed that Wong made it out on his own, although it is hard to believe. Wong just gives a thumbs up and says he wasn't alone, and as if on cue, Folk and Ralph appear, dragging the carcass of a huge hellhog behind them. The examiner cannot contain his cry of utter disbelief. Folk explains that they brought the beast as proof, and the purple-haired examiner is stunned. And his colleague panics as he realizes the full scale of the disaster. And at that very moment, Prince Heinz appears. The bearded examiner hastily covers up the traces, showering them with praise for their feat, and calling the battle truly magnificent, although the mention of the prince makes his blood run cold, for he sent the demonic beast against a person of royal blood, a crime punishable by death. Heinz asks him if he's okay, noticing that he looks pale, and that's putting it mildly. Then he abruptly changes his tone and begins to praise her for defeating the beast. But Wong watches this excessive enthusiasm with suspicion. Heinz immediately corrects him, stating that she was only present during the battle, and points directly at Van, acknowledging that without him, they would have died. The purple-haired examiner gives his colleague a heavy, meaningful look. The crowd begins to whisper, and all attention focuses on the boy, Gale. Folk is amazed at how much Agalda knows about magic, and Ralph confirms that they fought under Van's command, and the bearded examiner still can't believe that it was Agalda who led the attack, remembering his powerful recommendation. Van mentally apologizes to Helen again for the white lie, while the other students whisper among themselves, their former prejudices gradually giving way to sincere admiration. The purple-haired examiner approaches Wang and bows deeply. The examiner thanks Wang for protecting the prince, emphasizing that he considers it his direct duty. However, Van himself just shrugs indifferently and replies that they were only defending themselves and did nothing special, after which he hands over the flower he picked along with the others, thereby formally confirming that they have passed the exam. The examiner accepts their success with a forced smile, while his colleague can only silently realize that his perfectly constructed plan has finally collapsed. The final roll call begins. Prince Heinz is announced first. Then Folk, the arrogant nobleman who has changed noticeably after his ordeal, and his friend Ralph, who looks unexpectedly cheerful and even joyful. The bearded examiner freezes, holding his breath, waiting for the last name. His gaze rests on Van, standing calmly and confidently, after which the final confirmation is heard. Van Kruger is present. Heinz officially announces that all four have passed the test, and Folk and Ralph immediately begin to celebrate, pretending that they never doubted the outcome for a second, and Van thus becomes a student of the Magic Academy, albeit the most unusual of them all. Later, the examiners agree to launch a full investigation into the appearance of the demonic beast. The very next day, the new students gather for the entrance ceremony, where the academy's rector welcomes them and explains that here, not only magical talent is valued, but also true nobility, because the academy strives to educate those who will become the sword and shield of the kingdom. Wang stands among them, realizing that he has found himself in a future that seemed impossible just a short time ago, understanding that this is only the first step, but the world is finally beginning to change, and he vows to walk this path to the very end. However, Helena, the woman who gave him this chance, watches the ceremony from a high balcony, and soon she walks through the sun-drenched corridors of the academy. She opens a massive ornate door and enters a closed meeting room where other students are already waiting for her. The academy's elite, gathered in one place. Helena notices that everyone is present, but Karina, the pink-haired girl, immediately reproaches her for being late. And another girl, Amelia, asks about the purpose of the meeting. While the purple-haired young man Arnold remarks that they always discuss the same thing, and the smug prince contemptuously calls the topic foreign substance. Helena repeats these words with cold contempt. The prince begins to complain that the academy has become too tolerant, allowing a barbarian without magic to stand on equal footing with them, and with undisguised irritation reminds them that Van's recommendation came from one of the members of their own elite group, demanding an explanation for this breach of tradition, after which all eyes turn to Helena Steinart. A brief digression reminds us that the academy is full of proud nobles whose conflicts often end in duels, and to maintain order, a group of idealistic students has created a disciplinary committee. Known as the 5 Brilliant Crowns, they are the 5 strongest students at the academy. The prince demands to know what Helena was thinking when she recommended the gala, but she calmly replies that she simply recognized his strength and nothing more. This elicits laughter from Karina, who openly declares that the Agal cannot have power, calling their people cursed by God and incapable of possessing true power. Amelia supports her, wondering how a person without magic can protect anyone at all. The prince adds that everyone knows that for those without magic, God does not exist, to which Helena only snorts derisively, calling common sense a convenient excuse for bad traditions, and a tense silence hangs between her and the prince. Finally, Arnold offers a solution, to test Van and find out if he really has the power worthy of the academy. The prince enthusiastically supports the idea. He warns Helena that if he fails, her own judgment will be called into question, but she remains unperturbed and agrees, stating that they should not underestimate him if they do not want to be disgraced. The prince smiles, intrigued by her confidence. Karina eagerly volunteers, receiving permission and setting off on the mission with a clear desire to crush Van and his audacity. Meanwhile, Van himself walks through the brightly lit corridors of the academy, listening to students talking about classes and rankings, feeling the calm, almost normal school life he never had, reflecting on how the week has been surprisingly quiet, except for a few openly unfriendly glances. In class, the professor lectures on the theory of magic, and decides to put someone in an awkward position by calling on Van to explain a complex concept. And Van calmly stands up, ready to answer, while the other students whisper among themselves, admitting that they don't know the answer themselves. The professor smirks, mocking the very idea that a gala could understand magic. But Van begins to explain the theory without a single mistake, logically and consistently, causing the teacher's jaw to literally drop. And Wang, without pausing, adds to the explanation with the application of this theory in modern magic, and even delves into the details with a confident smile, forcing the professor to merely mumble that the answer is more than sufficient. And from that very day, the open mockery and harassment completely stopped, as if someone invisible had drawn a line that no one dared to cross. At that moment, Ralph pats Van on the shoulder with a broad smile and asks why he looks so serious, suggesting they go to lunch together, as if everything that is happening is just normal school routine. Van smiles back and admits that the current peace is largely thanks to them, both Ralph and Folk. Ralph just blinks in confusion, clearly not understanding what he is being thanked for, while Van simply says that he has been very helpful and leads the way down the corridor. They walk side by side, and a friendship quietly blossoms between them. But suddenly a sharp voice makes them stop. Wang turns around and calmly asks what she wants. The purple-haired girl coldly declares that he walked past her without acknowledging her. He apologizes politely, but it is clear from her gaze that this is not enough. The next second, a blade is held to his throat, and the girl hisses with a contemptuous smile that a gal must know his place and crawl where he belongs. Wang calmly replies that there is no need for such hostility, but she only asks if he really understands his position, and the blade moves even closer. Ralph screams in horror that she has gone too far, and she coldly promises Wong a peaceful life if he simply learns to obey. At that moment, Van's expression darkens, and he calmly says that he usually does the opposite when threatened. He grabs the blade with his bare hand, and the girl tries to pull the weapon away, already feeling its power. But Van sharply twists the blade, redirecting her own effort against her. Her stance breaks, her fingers reflexively clench, and her entire weight falls on the thin strip of metal, after which, with one precise movement, Wong brings the blade to its breaking point and shatters it into pieces, using a technique known as blade fracture. He remarks mockingly that she has chosen a weapon that is too fragile and non-magical, obviously intended only for training and not for real combat. The girl is boiling with anger and admits that combat blades are prohibited on academy grounds. But Wong immediately picks up on a new expression: 5 shining crowns. She coldly declares that her part is done and leaves, but as soon as the tension subsides, a new figure appears, vowing to correct his behavior. Ralph is horrified to recognize her as the legendary Princess Karina, and Wong looks up, instantly sensing the heavy, dangerous aura emanating from her. Bloodblade, Karina is a warrior with countless lives on her hands, and Wong couldn't help but wonder what such a person was doing here, within the walls of the academy, why she was among the students, and why her attention, full of hidden danger, was directed specifically at him, as if there was already an invisible connection between them, rooted in events that were yet to come. In his first life, when he was still a hired assassin, the kingdom was shaken by endless uprisings. Blood flowed like a river, power changed hands, and chaos and betrayal became the familiar backdrop of his existence. Behind all this was a combat unit consisting of the remnants of the faction, Purification of the Ring of White Destruction, and the most formidable, most ruthless fighter among them was the Bloodblade, Karina. This girl's hands were covered in blood. In her lifetime, she had taken the lives of countless heroes, crushing them with her unmatched skill and ruthless precision. The kingdom was destroyed by the Ring of White Destruction at the cost of incredible sacrifices, but the chaos that arose that day was only the beginning. It gave rise to the subsequent war for the throne and legacy, and the main character saw her only once, on the battlefield, but he was absolutely sure it was her. It was Karina. And so, only one question echoed in Van's head. Why was the enemy of the kingdom now here, at the academy? Karina stared at him with obvious surprise when he remained silent for too long, not saying a word, which was frankly rude for a senior student. Realizing this, Van immediately apologized, admitting that he simply did not understand that she was a senior. Why did Karina lose her voice for a moment? His friend hastily ordered Wang to stop, reminding him that he was standing in front of one of the 5 crowns. But Wang didn't even know what that meant, so his friend quickly explained that the 5 crowns were the 5 strongest students at the academy, whose power, influence, and origins were on a completely different level from the rest of the students. Specifically, he was now standing before a true genius who had entered the academy at the age of 13. Hearing this, Wang became noticeably more cautious. Karina just smiled and thanked the guy for the introduction, and it was at that moment Wang finally realized that Bloodblade really did come from the highest aristocracy, and that her noble origins had probably been deliberately concealed after she became a rebel. But who would have thought that he would meet her here? Perhaps this was his chance to kill her now, before she started a war for the throne in the future. Karina began to get visibly angry when she saw that Wang was thinking about something else while she was talking to him, because it was the height of disrespect to a senior, and then she took out her sword, immediately warning him that she had permission to carry a weapon. As she spoke, her hand was already on the red hilt, and Wang immediately understood. This was an unusual stance, one of the Bloodblade's signature moves, a strike with an instant grab, about which legends circulated that the victim died without even seeing the blade. Wang's friend panicked and shouted, begging him to apologize immediately. But Wang asked him to step aside. He wanted to check something. Both took up fighting stances, the air literally buzzing with tension. And in the next moment, Karina disappeared, ending up behind him, leaving only a dazzling flash. Van grabbed his shoulder, realizing that the blow had been delivered, and collapsed to his knees. Karina, with a thoughtful expression on her face, announced that she was interrupting the punishment and would postpone it to another time and place, because it would be a shame to deal with such a guy in an instant. She left with the other girl, leaving Wang on the floor, and he was genuinely impressed by her strength. Later, Karina's companion asked why she had let the guys go, but Karina only managed to say that she hadn't let anyone go, after which she collapsed on the floor, not understanding what had happened. The girl ran up to her in a panic, but Karina asked her not to tell anyone about it, and pulling up her shirt, showed her the mark from the blow. Then her companion remembered the ancient books. A blow to the solar plexus, the most vulnerable point, after which the body refuses to obey and the pain becomes unbearable. The purple-haired girl cautiously asked if it was a fight, but Karina remembered that moment. She was aiming for his neck, and he, without hesitation, struck precisely at the vulnerable spot. And although she tried to dodge, the blade went wide, missing its target, while his blow was perfect. It was the principle of Aikido, a technique from legends, and Karina did not understand where he knew such techniques from. The girl firmly stated that it was not a draw, because only Lady Karina remained on her feet. Perhaps it was even a victory. But Karina shook her head and said, "No, the blow was strong but not fatal. But if it had been a real fight and he had really wanted to kill her, she would have lost." She admitted that she had underestimated him, and next time she would prepare a blade that would not break on his fangs. The other students looked on in surprise, as Wang walked away arm in arm with his friend, who kept asking what it was all about. But Wang just smiled and said he was just checking something, which made his friend even more anxious. In the end, Wang admitted that although Karina had threatened him, she hadn't fought seriously, and even called it a punishment, while restraining herself. And most importantly, the current Karina had not yet become the Bloodblade from the future, which meant that if he didn't kill her now, he had a chance to change fate. After that, his friend took him to the infirmary, realizing that he needed help. The next day, upon entering the auditorium, Wang noticed that many students were looking at him with contempt, whispering that he had gone against the 5 crowns and thought too highly of himself. But his friends immediately approached him and advised him not to pay attention, because they were just windbags who only cared about gossiping about someone. One of them even said that he would apologize to them and ask his father to put in a good word for them with the Luther family. To which Wang just scratched his head and sincerely said that he had amazingly good friends, and when they first met, he would never have thought that things would turn out this way. He was pleased, but he understood that ultimately, he would have to figure it out himself to prevent the impending tragedy, and to do so, he would have to face it again, right now, because the 5 crowns were just keeping order, which meant he had nothing to fear. And at that very moment, the door opened, and a green-eyed girl entered the auditorium, calling Van by name.